Welcome. This is the Interviews with Leaders in Fintech and Web3 podcast, and I'm your host, Matthew Cheung from Work in Fintech. And we're delighted to have on our show today Vassilis Tziokas. He's the global lead for Web3 business development and strategy at Microsoft.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here.
Can you kind of introduce yourself and what you actually do at Microsoft at the moment?
Sure. I'm Vassilis. I'm working at Microsoft for the last almost 7 years now. And the past 6 months, I'm working in a brand new and small team, small but mighty, doing Web3 business development and strategy. What actually that means is that we are designing the go-to-market strategy of Microsoft in the Web3 space. So we work with engineering, with sales, with marketing, and of course, we try to execute high-impact partnerships with strategic players in Web3 that will bring this go-to-market to life. So that's the business development part of it, the partnership. So it's many things together, but actually we're designing how Microsoft what is the role of Microsoft in this new evolving Web3 space.
So can you talk to me and talk to listeners about how you got to this role and some of your background and where you kind of started off? Because a lot of people that we've spoken to on this show, there's never a straight path from A to B. There's a lot of kind of pivoting around through that journey. You learn a lot of skills as well. Can you talk about your story?
Sure. It's a great question. So if I go a few years back, what I have studied is business strategy and marketing. That's my, let's say, academic background. As I said, I have been working in Microsoft for 7 years, and my previous roles were always in sales strategy and go-to-market. That's how I define myself as a professional. The way I got into Web3, as I think most of the people in Web3, exactly because it's a nascent space, is by deep diving out of personal interest. I just identified a few months ago that I spend all my personal time outside Microsoft reading, contributing and learning about Web3. That was my passion. And this space still excites me amazingly. So I ended up here because there are some like-minded people at Microsoft, and we made a case. And of course, we believe that Microsoft has a role to play, and I'm happy to describe that later in Web3. So we somehow formed that team, that leadership team. So just to summarize, my answer is it started out of personal interest, and that's still the case. I think everyone who is in Web3, regardless of whether it's a big enterprise like Microsoft or a small startup or even a developer, it comes out of their passion for this new emerging technology, right? It's a real philosophical passion for most of the people. So, and that's one of the most exciting things in the space. But yeah, that's in a few words my professional journey and how I ended up in Web3.
And can you talk about your early part of your career in marketing?
Sure.
And how did you get interested and involved in that?
Sure. And it's a good question in the way that marketing, in my humble opinion, is a convoluted term, right? People use it. It's this chameleon phrase, right? It can take different meanings according to the context that you are using it. So I started in marketing. My first job out of my master's degree in the UK was in marketing in a mobile technology company called Upstream, which is still one of the biggest mobile technology companies. And it was pure marketing in the sense that it was about how you set up a lead generation mechanism, working with PR, working with the advertising agency. So the typical pillars of marketing, right? How you build an engine about brand awareness and sales, I would say, generation. That was it. Back then, I do believe that I learned a ton, right? Because it was a startup, but also it was a big enterprise for the industry that it was operating within. So I learned a ton. And I think that one thing that I was always missing is how you can connect more effectively the marketing engine with sales, right? I think all of the listeners that are listening to your podcast know about this never-ending chasm between sales and marketing. There are millions of articles of marketing and sales are not friends. They do not work well together because marketing cannot understand why sales do not sell, and sales cannot understand why marketing cannot operate with a sales mindset. So they see the world in two different ways. I think that's a very archaic thing. I think that we have, through technology, through startups, and through new professionals, this chasm has started becoming smaller and smaller. So just to come back to your question, that was a foundation of my knowledge out of my first professional experience. And then I understood that I want to be that person that will understand both worlds. I did a 2-year, I would say, role in consumer goods, which was not about technology. To be honest with you, that was a huge learning experience for me because consumer goods is still a very big industry. We are all using consumer goods in our everyday life. And it brought me this experience of how the real world operates outside technology. You have to talk with grocery stores and sales and actually move physical goods from one place. So it has a different component of marketing. Again, it's a very marketing-driven world because there's a huge competition with other consumer brands. And the last 7 years I've been with Microsoft. And as I was saying before, all my roles were all about sales, go-to-market, and enablement, right? Happy to discuss that over, but I would say that this is the journey, right? I started with the foundation of marketing. I understood that there is something that needs to be connected that very few people understand. And hopefully I'm one of those leaders that can do that. But that's the idea.
It's interesting that you have gone from marketing and then now moved into Web3 because it's something that you found very interesting, and very much there's this tribe of like-minded individuals with Web3, and you found that within Microsoft. We're going to that point that there's a kind of a misconception among a lot of people that you need to be a developer to work in Web3 and Fintech and kind of these kind of very technology-heavy industries. But that's not your background, and that's not what you're doing either. So can you talk about some of the opportunities that you see in Web3? And we'll talk about what is Web3 in a second, but can you talk about the opportunities that you see in Web3 outside of just coders and developers?
No, I think it's a spot on comment, and people need to understand that, especially young professionals who may be discouraged to enter Web3 because they don't have an engineering background. I don't think that's the case, right? I think Web3 will become very soon what we call now the internet. The internet needs all kinds of professionals. Of course, in those early days, having an engineering background or an engineering knowledge would help, right? Because it's a very developer-driven world. However, as it becomes more mature, I think we will see the emergence and the need for more business people, what we call business sales people, go-to-market people, strategy people, marketing people, right? And we need that because that's the only way that Web3 can mature. If it was only a developer thing, it would be a very siloed, very narrow-minded thing. And even the developers themselves, they're asking for business people, right? And again, I want to be very fair. In my mind, it's not a black or white. A developer can have a huge business acumen, and a business person can understand technology. I consider myself a business person, but I have spent a lot of time at nights reading about Solidity, Web3 development, right? Because I consider that part of my job. I need to understand what needs to be done under the hood, as they say, for a Web3 application to come into life. And there are many developers who are spending a lot of their time about sales funnels and go-to-market. So it's not a black or white. I think I see in my daily experience a new hybrid type of professional who is a very well-rounded professional and can understand everything. So if there is one advice I would say to young professionals who do not have an engineering background and want to enter Web3 is that they're all welcome. They are welcome, but it will take them time, effort, and energy, and invest those resources in order to understand Web3, both from a business, but also from a technology point of view.
There's been a lot of focus, like you say, on the engineering piece of it, and that's come a lot from the state of the maturity of the technology and where we are. It's still very tech heavy. But what we've seen, obviously, in the last probably 18 months or so is the rise of gaming's always been there for a long time, but that's becoming massive and bigger than film and all the other media out there. You've got There's been a lot of metaverse kind of plays going on in the last year and people talking about a lot more. And then NFTs have become this kind of bridge, probably connecting some of those things. So it's become a bit of an on-ramp for retail and consumers to be able to start just playing around with those technologies. So 2 questions. One is, what would be the on-ramp for enterprise? Because enterprise has been looking at blockchain for a long time, but has not really been adopted in earnest until probably the last 6 months or so. There's some big names looking at big projects. Mm-hmm. What's going to be that on-ramp piece for enterprises to really embrace it? And then outside of that, where do we see the future of enterprise technology embracing Web3 and decentralized kind of ways of doing things? And, for example, we saw there was a big deal that was announced from Microsoft taking a stake into LSEG, which is, formerly London Stock Exchange, but now a data and analytics company. So it'd be interesting if you just talk about that kind of trend from the on-ramp for enterprises really embracing it through to where the direction of travel is in the next, few years.
You asked 2 very interesting questions. One, the first one was, what will be the on-ramp, right? And I don't think there is one answer. I think there are multiple answers. At the end of the day, any enterprise, any commercial enterprise company, what they're looking for is to generate value, either for their shareholders or for their employees or for their consumers/customers. What I mean by that is that, let's take the example of Starbucks. For those who do not know, Starbucks recently launched Odyssey, right? Which is, I would call it an NFT-based loyalty program. Let's call it this way, right? So Starbucks, being a very consumer-driven business, and going back to consumer goods, the point that I made before, what they really want to do is to unlock and generate new experiences for the consumers so that they make them stick to Starbucks and not move to another coffee company, right? So NFTs, non-fungible tokens, have this innate capability. They have the capability that you can own something which is on blockchain, and that something can unlock further value, benefits for you. We are coming from many years of loyalty programs and airline miles. For me, this is the evolution of it, right? I'm flying tomorrow to London, for example, and I was checking my miles. If you think about it, the miles belong to me, right? It's a token in a way from an airline to me, right? But it's a very static one. It could be translated into some side benefits. If I have miles, I could buy an extra seat or whatever, but it's not really, liquid, if I may call it this way. And by liquid, I don't mean necessarily liquid into real money, but liquid in forms of other experiences. So that's an example of how an enterprise, a very big one like Starbucks, is using a dynamic concept like NFTs to provide value to the consumers and, of course, finally to their bottom line and P&L. So just to summarize my answer, there's not one thing. I think every company, according to the industry they operate in, they will find different value in Web3 and blockchains. For some, it may be NFTs. For some, it may be blockchains and immutability. For others, may be this openness and traceability. For others, may be DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization, and how they can create consortia with other companies. Again, Web3, the way I see it, it will be something like we call the internet, right? So who knows what other ideas will come up, any use cases. Another thing I would say before I move to the second part of the question, Matthew, is that we're also seeing some very interesting examples of real life Web3. What I mean by that is we do see, for example, Helium, which is a startup which is using actual devices that people can buy for 5G connectivity. So it's actually a Web3 wireless network, right? They recently made a partnership with T-Mobile, and through tokens, which again is another innate capability of Web3, they coordinate and they incentivize people to do stuff. So I think more use cases will be born the next months as business people and technology people will work together, and who knows what emerging business models we will see. But at the end of the day, it was always and it will always be about value. Now, the second part of the question, can you remind me? It was about how enterprise...
I suppose the trend over the next few years for enterprise.
Correct.
You probably touched on it already in some of those questions, but where's the convergence of these different these different kind of pioneering use cases we're seeing at the moment? Do you have a vision of where do you think it's going to head?
Sure. I do. What I see in my daily life and for many customers and partners I'm talking to every day is what I call a Web 2.5. And it's of course, it's a euphemism, but it's this idea of symbiosis, right? It's how you can use existing Web 2 platforms to onboard people to Web 3. These platforms may be enterprise platforms, right? For example, Teams, and I'm biased because I'm working for Microsoft, but Teams is a platform that people are using, millions of people are using daily to interact, to communicate, right? To exchange information. Potentially in the future, having Teams with automated workflows and with Web3 capabilities and with tokenized calls, for example, could be an amazing use case for enterprises to move to Web3. So I do see this trend of symbiosis. I do see companies, mostly in the FSI space right now, in the financial services industry, understanding the value of blockchain, but at the same time wanting to be a little bit, I wouldn't say careful, but wanting to be a little bit on an experimental mode, right? Web 2 is great. I don't see the world as black or white, but there are some things that Web 2 cannot do, right? Again, because how it is built in terms of technology. So how you can bring innate capabilities of Web 3 into Web 2 and vice versa. This is where I think the magic happens. And actually, the case studies, the customer stories we have seen from Microsoft and other companies, this is exactly what it is. How you can combine things and make this, make this holy grail of 1 + 1 makes 3, how you can make it a reality. But yeah, that's how I see it.
Was like we saw the other week, Stripe, you can now do crypto payments through Stripe. So again, it's this kind of on ramp and
exactly.
Or providing benefit.
For example, stablecoins. Stablecoins for me, it's a Web 2.5 thing, right?
Yeah.
It has the innate capabilities of a blockchain, right? But it's pegged to US dollar, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's a Web 2.5, and it's great. By the way, it works. It works perfectly, right? USDC is a very stable coin, right? I do think that Circle as a company is doing very well. And again, we're in super early stages. So for me, stablecoins is a great example of Web 2.5 because it combines the good things of both worlds.
So let's look at sales and marketing, like your where you spent your career. You mentioned earlier about different Web3 projects and so on. At the end of the day, you need to create value. And if you create value, then you're going to be able to sell what you're doing. And having Web3 approaches, there's some new ways of doing marketing and so on with like tokenizations to generate communities and like what Starbucks is doing, incentivizing users. But not just about Web3, more generally with sales and marketing. Can you talk about maybe for some of the kind of listeners who are still studying, what is go-to-market and what is sales enablement as well?
Sure, it's a great question and I'm smiling because that's a question I have been asking myself for many years. I think that's a necessary part of the journey of every strategy professional. I do believe that every person comes with a different definition, which is great. That shows the dynamism of the sector. But I will tell you what I have come up as an answer, right? And maybe other people will disagree. And let me start with what they are not. Sometimes defining what you are not is more important than defining what you are. So go-to-market is not marketing. I think that's a mistake that many, even seasoned professionals are doing. And to be honest, it really bugs me because that's definitely not the case. The way I describe go-to-market is how an organization engages with customers to convince them to buy the product or the service. I know it's a very simplistic term, but if I could stick to one definition, that's how I would stick. Of course, by how an organization engages, the word how means many things. And marketing is one of them. So I see marketing as a pillar of go-to-market. And before I go and deep dive on that, you also asked me about sales enablement. For me, that's another very exciting part, which is also misunderstood and sometimes even underrated, I would say. So sales enablement, again, if you want a definition, the way I use it is the strategic use of people, processes, and technology to improve sales productivity and increase revenue, right? Again, if you put them next to each other, you will see many similarities. That's why sales enablement and go-to-market, usually teams in big enterprises, work closely together or even are the same team. So you have a go-to-market leader and a sales enablement leader, but they all report to the same, I would say, senior person. So that's how I would define them. They're not marketing, definitely. These are different animals, but they live in the same forest, if I may call it this way, but equally important.
And for someone starting out in their career, what opportunities are there in kind of go-to-market and sales enablement? Is that something you would start in, or something you kind of work towards when you gain some other skills and you find a specific niche area that you really like?
It's a good question. I don't think you can start as a go-to-market professional because you need to, as I said before, you need to have a solid foundation of knowledge of how sales works and how marketing works and how strategy works. So if go-to-market and sales enablement is the end product, the recipe, the ingredients are marketing, strategy, sales, right? So you need to have an understanding of how this thing works. You don't need to be an expert in sales and an expert in marketing to be a go-to-market person, but you need to understand how those things work and how actually, as I said before, they are correlated and they are combined, right? So I don't know if there is any degree in go-to-market. I don't think there is. But there are many degrees in strategy, of course, and there are many degrees in sales, even in business development, and even in marketing. So what I would say to young professionals is that do not try to narrow yourself and say, hey, I'm a marketing person, right? Because especially in big enterprise or even in startups, nobody is just marketing, right? You will need to be, or actually let me phrase it differently. If you are just marketing, you will never be able to provide value to sales. And if you are just sales, you will never be able to work with others. So try to see those skills as Lego blocks. And when you put them together, something new comes up, right? So yeah, that's how I see it.
And similarly on the strategy piece, like you said, there might not be any degrees in go-to-market, not that we're aware of, but there is in strategy. Do you think strategy is something you can start off on day one, or similarly, do you need to have kind of dip your toes in some of the other areas of a business before you move into that?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think strategy is a little bit different than the others. In which way? I think strategy is also a philosophical thing, right? In the sense that nobody can really define what strategy is. I can try to come up with a definition, but the way I see it is that strategy is embedded in everything. Strategy is embedded in this podcast as we speak. You have a strategy, right? You would like this podcast to come up in your mind as X. You have an embedded strategy as you talk. So for me, it's something innate, it's something philosophical, it's something which is like an umbrella thing, right? Of course, you can study strategy. I think strategy is one of the key courses in all MBA degrees and business degrees. If there is one industry that is correlated with strategy, is the consulting industry. So if you're working for the McKinseys, the Accentures, the SAP Youngs of the world, most people define themselves as strategy professionals. My recommendation would be that going back to one of probably your listeners know Nicholas Nassim Taleb, right? Try to have skin in the game. What I have seen in my experience, there are many strategy people who have never done what they are strategizing about. So you will find in your career many people who are strategy experts in sales, but if you ask them when they sold something, they never have done sales, right? And or an expert strategy person in go-to-market, and when you ask them what go-to-market they have done, they have never done one. So for me, strategy is something which comes also through experience and through lived, I would say, experiences. So that's my bit on strategy.
Let's move on to generative AI, because it's been a hot topic in the last, kind of few months, and particularly in the last few weeks, where we've seen ChatGPT gain like over 1 million users in less than a week, the fastest adoption of software or technology we've ever seen. And that's and then that's running on Azure, right? And Microsoft is a contributor to OpenAI, which also has produced DALL-E 2, where you can ask DALL-E 2 to create images and so on. So we're seeing really the kind of version 1.0 of generative AI, and you can already see its benefits. We've started to look at, when I say we, I mean I Push Pull, where I'm also CEO of. We've started to use ChatGPT for doing unit testing on some code, just playing around it in the last week. We can already see benefits to enhancing, a development team. But that's in the world of kind of development and coding. In the world of sales and marketing, how do you see generative AI being able to augment or help or even replace some sales and marketing functions, which historically have been very kind of people-facing and something where there's a creative element to what a human can do? Where do you see these technologies helping sales and marketing?
It's a great question. I spent the weekend talking with some friends about generative AI, and these are the things we were contemplating with. I see it in the following way. What I have learned in my experience is not try to make very long-term predictions, because who knows, right? There are many black swans, but I would say the following, especially in those sectors, disciplines that you mentioned, sales and marketing. I'm a techno optimist by definition, so I do see that as an enhancement thing rather than as a replacement, right? So I do believe that it will increase the productivity of strong marketing and sales professional, because you can easily do some stuff which are boring, to be honest. For example, like, I don't know, write a very convincing email about X. But there will, from what I have used, and I have been using ChatGPT 3 pretty much every day just to test it myself, the results are good enough, but they always require some human skill, talent, knowledge, context to make them perfect, right? Of course, so I would say the following. If you are a good, ambitious professional in the marketing and sales, ChatGPT can really scale up your capacity and your productivity, and you can see it as something that can allow you to invest time in most creative and contextual tasks, right? If you are just a person who just wants to send random emails in, sales prospects, and you don't care about the context, yeah, sure, it could replace you in the future, right? But I do see ChatGPT as a layer that would further unlock productivity and creativity for professionals, right? That's how I see it. Who knows what will happen, right? Of course, it will become better. It's a large language model. By definition, it becomes better, right? That's the nature of it. To be honest, I would go a little bit more if I were a developer. That, for me, that's the magic. The magic is not about creating a marketing copy or a sales pitch, right? You could easily do that through Google as well. You could Google it, and you could take copy paste, and it was a similar type of stuff. But we never had an autofill kind of coding platform, right? And by the way, as Microsoft, we have the Copilot in GitHub, right? Which is an enterprise version of ChatGPT, and it works amazingly well. I do see that as a further unlock tool for productivity. Maybe that's the positive side of me, but I truly believe that there are some great days ahead of us as human species if we manage it smartly and efficiently.
Well, that's what technology is about. It's about unlocking productivity and automating mundane manual tasks, and then enhancing what you're doing, freeing up your time to do more creative and value-add tasks.
There's another element which connects generative AI and blockchain. I know that this is Web3 podcast, so maybe that's of interest. I want to make a specific mention on that, because there are many people, for all the good reasons, who are very skeptical with Web3 in terms of which are the real use cases, right? And the way I see it is that actually the generative AI is great news for Web3, in the sense that through blockchain, in the future, we will be able to identify what is someone that a real person wrote rather than a machine wrote, right? There is this idea of proof of personhood at Web3, right? You can prove that you're a person, you're a real human being, and you can create input on a blockchain, right? So that feature, how blockchains can distinct what something was written, created, generated by a human being versus a machine could be an amazing use case, which like 1 year ago, nobody would have ever thought. That goes back to my point, right, of symbiosis, right? AI and Web3, if you asked me like 2 years ago, hey, blockchain will be the verification layer, I was like, I don't see that. But sometimes life surprises, right? So I just want to make that asterisk because it's important for me.
Isn't Microsoft working on like a digital ID service?
Actually, we have people can actually visit the website. We have something called decentralized identity, which is part of our Entra offering. Entra is the name of all our security and identity offerings. Yes, we're working on this direction, but again, I do see that as something that will be of like general use in the near future, right? We will be able to submit to a blockchain what we have submitted, what we have created, and then it will be distinctive that what a GPT or another large language model will have created.
So to round off, what words of advice would you give our listeners who are anything from young people who are studying or just starting their career through to people that have been in traditional finance and traditional industries who are very interested in Web3 and also Fintech? What words of advice would you give to people looking into this area? Because you already said that in the last few years you went down, they call it going down the rabbit hole, but you've spent time doing that, as have I as well, and learning about these new technologies and how the Web2 world can make that evolution. Rather than it's not a revolution, it's an evolution, and it's this kind of incremental steps towards a vision of something in the future. Or what words of advice would you give to people looking to get into Web3?
I'm a person who doesn't believe a lot in the concept of advice. I will share some of my insights, and hopefully they will be of value to those people. I wouldn't say the same things for young professionals and seasoned ones, but for graduate students or for people who want to enter Web3 is that you're all welcome. Right? What I have seen in my daily experience is that actually the people who are a little bit distanced from the core tech of Web3 are the ones who can connect the dots and can see a vision that other people cannot see. Sometimes when you take the bird's eye view, you can see more things, right? So I would say you're all welcome. The future is not written. Like 3 years ago, blockchain was actually correlated with Bitcoin and a few nerds in a good way that worked. So and now it's a bigger thing. The future is not written. The future will be written by you, right? And you will define it, right? So you're all welcome. Try to bring ideas, innovation, knowledge, and something else, and then I will make the segue to the finance professionals, right? Try also to bring values, ethics, transparency, responsibility, accountability, even compliance. That's the segue to the finance, right? I do believe that this is a space that unfortunately there are many malicious actors, bad behaviors. We all know them. We have all seen them in the news. Actually, there was some news a few hours ago about someone being arrested. What I would say is that these are things that regardless of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, Web 25, they make us as human species distinct, right? And they are innate characteristics of a well-functioning society. So only if we operate with ethics, with transparency, with accountability, with responsibility, we will be able to advance forward. And Web3 really needs that. And the reason that Web3 really needs that is because it's an industry right now very much tied to finance. And now I'm moving to your second part of the question, right? So especially finance, when we have to deal with people's money, we need to be extra careful, extra compliant, extra responsible, right? So again, that's not an advice. Everyone knows that. But when you are trying to form partnerships, create new products, try to embed those things, those values in what you do, because that's the right thing to do, what's the ethical thing to do. And that's, I think, something that will make crypto/Web3/blockchain more easily accepted by Web2 folks, right? So that's my advice, if I may call it advice.
Just one last question, because you mentioned someone who might have been arrested in terms of FTX you're referring to then. And FTX was, even though they're saying they're a crypto exchange, they're a centralized exchange. And now you kind of have this people looking at, okay, one of the reasons it didn't work is because it was centralized, and now you have more decentralized exchanges kind of in focus. Going to what we're talking about with ChatGPT and what OpenAI is doing, what's your thoughts on OpenAI, in a way, is a centralized holder of all of these large language models, and people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman and that group of people are driving the direction of that out of good intent in the right direction. But actually, that's centralized as well. What do you think about the way that can evolve and the way that can be shared so it's more decentralized?
Yeah, I don't believe, and that's Vassilis' opinion, right? But I don't believe that centralization is evil, right? There are forms and forms of centralization. And I don't believe that FTX failed because it was centralized. I think FTX failed because no, it's a generic comment, it's not about you. I'm sure we share the same opinion, but I don't think FTX failed because it was centralized. FTX failed because they were not ethical business people and they were doing all kinds of shady things, right? I do believe that there is a future of both DEX, decentralized exchanges, and centralized exchanges, and the same about large language models. Actually, I think I have seen some examples of decentralized language models. I think everything is welcome. I don't believe centralization is evil, but I do believe that centralization, extreme centralization, can lead to bad outcomes. So what I would say is that we need more innovation, we need more open AIs, right? We need healthy competition, and if something can work in a truly decentralized manner, perfect. It will be another option. There are people who are investing money in Coinbase, which is a centralized company, using crypto, and there are people who are investing money in Uniswap, which is completely decentralized, right? So one of the two is not more evil or more good than the other. They're just different options, right? And I can say, and I'm very confident when I'm saying that, there are many decentralized things which are completely decentralized, and because of them being completely decentralized, they do not work, right?
Yeah.
Going on an anthropological discussion, humans need a form of centralization. That's how societies work, right? By definition. So as a philosophical concept, I don't think centralization is bad. I do think that extreme concentration of power is bad. Unethical behavior is bad. So I can keep going on, but that's how I approach.
I know you need to drop off maybe for another time.
Question, by the way. It was a great question.
And it was a good answer. So I do know you need to drop. So Vassilis, thank you so much for your time today. How can people follow you or kind of hear from you?
Sure. I mean, my name, you can just put my name on LinkedIn and I think you will find me, and I'm happy to be connected with everyone who is interested. And I am on Twitter as well, pretty active. It is my surname, Tziokas V, which is the first letter of my first name. So especially to the young professionals and the graduate students, if I have the time, I will be more than happy to help share my insights, share my journey. I have been there a few years ago and I know how it is. And any voice can help. So I'm here for you guys.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. And for more interviews, please go to Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts and just search for Work in Fintech. And you'll hear interviews from blockchain.com and Google through to JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, where we talk to leaders in the fintech universe. And also sign up to our mailing list at workinfintech.com. We'll keep you up to date with the fintech and crypto courses, cohorts, and coaching that we'll be launching. And follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you very much for listening.